Welcome. We're so excited that you're here, Angie. I'm honestly enthralled by your background, like everything you've done in large CPG, what you're doing at the agency today. And the goal of this conversation is we'll talk through a lot of that. So what you were doing in your background and what you're doing moving forward, and then open it up for questions at the end from the audience. But to start, I'd love to just hear about you. What brought you to CPG and why are you here?
Well, what brought me to CPG was really that I wanted an international career. And so I majored in college in international business and French and went to work at Purina because I knew that Purina had international operations. And so the first 7 years of my career were there. And I actually did get to realize that dream when I was honored and thrilled to be appointed to form the first global team for Walmart when they began their international operations. So that's how it all began, was because of wanting to go international, and then spent a little bit of time at Pepsi and then Energizer, and then out on my own for 10 years. Back to Anheuser-Busch for 3 years, and then back out on my own since 2019.
I mean, those are some pretty big brands. How do you even start or get your foot in the door with one of those in the early days of your career?
Oh gosh, the early days of my career. Well, maybe this tells you a lot about how I think. I started my career right out of college working on the 800 number back at Purina when all customer 800 numbers were actually here in the US and had actual people answering phones. And so I would spend my days talking to shoppers about asking for coupons or asking, what should I do? My dog is sick, or my kitten won't eat. Or we also had cereal back then. So we had Chex cereal. And so it was fun. And then I went and got a master's degree and went to work for the national accounts team. And that's how it all began, Sam.
Wow. I mean, I think there's so much power in talking to the customer directly at the beginning, like learning more about insights and what people like about the brand. And how we actually met was the Women's Venture Summit. I don't remember who you were talking to in the lobby, but you were chatting with someone, and I walked up and they were like, "Oh, Sam, you need to meet this person. They're talking about exactly what you do." And what was the presentation on? It was like, how to succeed in retail, or what was the
I think
topic?
it was called The Road to Retail: What Founders and Investors Need to Know.
What founders and investors need to know. And what was your intention when you were setting up that presentation? Like, what do you think is the biggest thing in CPG that people need to know?
The biggest thing in CPG that people need to know, it's hard to be a founder, or to shift channels. We've got a lot of brands that have gone from strictly e-com over to brick and mortar. You need to be brave and coachable. And I see emerging brands underestimating the challenge. 95% of new products fail. And so an insider's knowledge of all the anticipated obstacles is super important. The other thing I think is interesting is people tend to think it's all about the product and the product characteristics. It's natural, it's organic, or it solves this need. And actually, from a retailer standpoint, your product, it's not so much about the actual product than it is the shoppers that product brings in, the trips and the frequency that they visit the store, and the incremental dollars. So really the product is a resource or a tool to bring in the shoppers, the trips, and the dollars.
Interesting. It's interesting to think of it that way because we have had some early and mid-stage entrepreneurs that have come onto the webinars in the past. And as a CPG founder, I think you're thinking all about product in the beginning. Like, what's the branding? What's the packaging? What's the lane? But as you get to retail, it is much more of a business in terms of like, how are you selling this product in mass into a retailer? Have you, coming from the brand side to now the agency side, do you see a difference between working like directly on the brand team versus working directly with the brand itself and how they're thinking about retail and what they have to be doing to get in?
We work with launching a lot of new brands. We also have been fortunate brands. I worked with one brand for 10 years and it was sold, and then since then it's been sold again and sold again. So it's been extremely successful. Some clients we launched years ago have come back to us to help them grow their sales. I think that my experience on the big brand side is sort of that I learned small brands don't really think they're competing against big brands, but you actually are. And that's because in the brick and mortar space, there's only 8 foot or 12 foot of space, and it doesn't grow. And it still accounts for 85% of all CPG sales. So if you really have dreams of exponential growth, it's a great way. Brick and mortar retail is a great way to get there. I know all the ways and the strategies and the narratives that they tell retailers to keep those brands off the shelf, because I was very successful in doing that. We broke sales records, we broke market share records, and we won awards. And a lot of the ways that we did that was by keeping emerging and challenger brands off the shelf. And so not about that anymore. And that's something really unique that we can bring to them.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm certain that perspective is really helpful. We, coming from the natural space originally, we're working with a lot of those like disruptor challenger brands and have a lot of relationships in that space. And I do think that is kind of the big question a lot of people have, like, what does it require to actually come in and take market share and move something off the shelf? So to see that kind of push and pull back and forth, I think would be really interesting. What kind of brands do you tend to work with today, and like who are you looking to support?
Well, I'm an OG natural shopper. I've been all about natural for the last 20 years, so I love natural brands. Smart Mouth mouthwash is one that we launched way back in the day, one of our first clients. Today we work with Wally's Natural. Bringing shoppers in from the natural channel into traditional retailers is a huge selling story for all of those emerging natural brands, because when we talk about the shoppers, the trips, and the dollars, those brands are usually bringing the shoppers and the dollars. And so, and because traditional retailers, food, drug, and mass retailers are usually a lot more convenient to get to and already have, shoppers already have reasons to go there. So more trips, more shoppers, more dollars, natural brands, I think have huge potential in traditional channels.
And I'm interested in just because I'm not as familiar with like how all of it works. When you're having that conversation about like the shoppers and the trips and the dollars and who's bringing that, who is that conversation with at the retailer that you're trying to show that you bring value in those specific categories?
It's usually the category manager.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what are they, how are they differentiating those things, or how are they deciding, is this going to bring in a lot of shoppers? Is this going to bring in a lot of dollars? Like, what are some of the things that they're trying to qualify on, or a brand would be judged against?
Data. So that's where your data and analytics come in. There's all sorts of ways to use the data to prove or to provide evidence that your brand can be successful in their environment. So it's important to know retailer by retailer. They have different nuances for what their goals are, and how they want to go to market. For example, Walgreens or CVS, a drug retailer versus a mass retailer, very different strategies. So fit whatever you're talking about into what is important to them. And then you're looking at things like social media followers, of course, website sales, of course, Amazon sales, engagement rates. Yeah, it's all about providing the proof that you can do what you say you can.
The omni-channel approach, right? Like, what's happening on different parts of the brand story and how does it all weave together? I like how you also differentiated between like, know what retailer you're selling into, because they do have different priorities. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine like the strategy that was super successful to get you into one big box retailer. If you try to just plug and play that strategy with a different one, there's probably going to be some gaps, I would imagine.
Right, right. Your consistent, brand identity obviously is consistent, and your shoppers are consistent, but they'll show up differently at different retailers depending on the shopper's mission at that store.
Do you do any like preliminary work with the brands to understand more about their shopper and like where they shop and where they would want to see the product in stores or in future rollouts?
We do a lot of work around that. Usually the first thing that we suggest is market research around understanding why consumers are buying, or also why they're not buying, so that you can understand from both sides of the coin. And also, what are the complementary, what else are they buying? What's the rest of their basket look like and why? And the best ways to reach them. Because we're often dealing with products that are a totally new concept. Like we introduced last year a lawn and garden product, totally natural. It's called biochar. And probably most people listening today have never even heard of biochar, but now you can go Google biochar and find out how it removes greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and conditions soil and helps to make beautiful, healthy plants.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard. What's the name of it again?
Biochar.
Biochar. And what retailers are they in?
Meijer and Walmart.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, I think the storytelling component of it is really interesting for a lot of the brands that tend to listen in to the webinars that we do with the content. Like how are they communicating what they're doing? What are the benefits of the product, both to consumers, but also to the buyer, or also when they're trying to, tell their story of how they should grow in that retailer. Is storytelling something that you work with on the brands? Do you have any recommendations for a brand that's trying to tell their story in the most compelling way? Like what they should be hitting on or what they should be focusing on?
Yeah, we actually do a messaging workshop. It's a couple of hours, and it's based on age-old storytelling research. It's the same type of approach that George Lucas used when writing Star Wars. It turns out that our brains are really wired to connect with a story about a hero who faces an obstacle and overcomes it and lives forever. Like Cinderella, it's the same story. She has a problem and it's her evil stepmother, and a fairy godmother gives her a plan, and then she does the plan and lives happily ever after. So that's what we try to develop for our clients, is we work with them to understand who's your hero. Is it Luke Skywalker or Cinderella? And then what is their problem? And then how can you guide them to fix their problem? And what will their life look like after their problem is fixed? And so that's the narrative that we coach our clients to tell, both to consumers and to retailers.
I love the hero's journey. I never would have thought of it in like a product capacity. But that's super cool that that's something that you do, because I could definitely see how that would tell the value and show like the arc of why somebody needs to put that in their basket. Is there anything like on the negative side where like, hey, don't say this, like these are the things that I would not talk about that don't really add value in the conversation or don't add value in the brand, potentially even red flags that people should be mindful of, not to say?
I mean, it's situational. One thing, of course, we would never talk ill of a competitor. Now we do competitive comparisons.
As we look towards like a brand that's maybe having that conversation with the buyer, maybe they did get shelf space, they're now launching nationwide in something like a Walmart. What are the next few steps? So the things that they have to be mindful of where they want to make that a success and show their use case to other retailers or get better shelf space. Like what do they need to be mindful of to be successful with their launch?
the digital presence is something that can be overlooked, and it's so foundational. So I think, and again, this will vary by retailer, but I recently saw Target reports that 76% of in-store shoppers either use the app or Target.com while shopping in-store. And so the importance of having your brand story narrative consistent across all your digital properties, all your retailers and your own properties, and then building out that digital presence in terms of accurate product descriptions, user testimonials, videos, photos, reviews, opportunities for sampling and trial, all the different ways that everything that we used to think about in terms of only physical happening in store, translating all that to the digital environment today is foundational.
I'm kind of surprised, honestly, by that statistic that it's that high, but very cool to know between the app and their website. It makes sense. I think when I'm in the store, I'm like looking at the app, trying to figure out where things are sometimes, and it'll show you the little aisle in it. But would you say that's been an evolution, like as digital has picked up? Back when you were with like Energizer and Purina, was it very focused on in-store and demos and those things, and now it's migrating towards much more digital first?
Absolutely. Now I'm also seeing where some brands are almost, forgetting about the in-store also. So you have to be omni-channel focused. Where I see a lot of brands struggle is, say they have been totally e-com, they've been pure play e-com, and so they're moving into brick and mortar and very dependent upon all the transparency of data available in digital marketing. So you know exactly which ad produced exactly which, the click-through rate or the engagement rate and the purchase rate. And it's very difficult for both senior level managers as well as the more operational marketing managers to kind of leave that safety where you can measure almost everything to translate it to a in-store environment where it's not so cut and dry. But we really need to balance the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely, I would say, a divide. We have a good amount of folks that listen in that are from the D2C world as well. So either have D2C brands and are desiring to get into retail or are making that transition. And it is a totally different world, and figuring out how to marry, okay, this is traditional shopper and these are how these programs run, with these are the expectations of, like you said, data transparency and knowing end to end, this is exactly what happened. How do you notice that teams are responding to that in real time, like maybe hiring roles that they didn't hire before to manage new digital programs? Like, how are you noticing almost the industry evolving in response to like a growth in digital?
I'm seeing a much more of an attempt for big brands. They've lived in a very siloed world of supply chain, marketing, sales. And there's an effort right now to coordinate and collaborate those worlds more than ever. And I think that's a huge advantage that small brands have over the big brands. Like at Retail Smarter, we don't need to go talk to anyone down the hall because we're all right here, and it's sales, marketing, and supply chain all in one. So we don't need to teach anyone about what we're trying to do at a certain retailer versus another. And we don't need to be concerned about harmonizing pricing or being on strategy with our promotion. So I think that's where I see that's the opportunity for brands, is to bring all that together, and also supply chain, especially, well, these days, it's for brands of all sizes that are still struggling with supply chain. And so the channels of fulfillment and which ones to prioritize and how to make sure that you are not having, too many special packs or SKUs that are inefficient. And so it's really all about collaborating and ensuring that everyone's working towards the same goal and the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. I think that's where a lot of the fruit is coming from.
Mm-hmm. The supply chain thing is interesting too. Like, I kind of want to double click on that for a second because, cash is king, especially in today's market, and having too much inventory or inventory of the wrong things can really become a problem for a business, especially in CPG. What kind of work are you doing, or what are the things that you're looking at in the supply chain world for brands that are trying not to run into those issues or things they could set up in advance?
I think that we're just trying to help them communicate better and and put some discipline around open communication, centralized data sources, one source of truth, and when needed, even bring in, outside vendors. There's a lot of startup vendors to help with these issues, which is great. A lot of SaaS type subscriber models, which are really helping emerging brands to be more efficient and also more affordable. And so our experience with different solutions at different size companies, I think, is helpful, because also it can be tempting for an emerging brand to come in with a solution that is actually way bigger and far more expensive than what they need. And in our world, if you overspend on your inventory management system, that means that takes money away from marketing. And so which one of those are both going to affect your growth? So you really can't consider one without the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, knowing where to spend and where not to spend, I think, is always the question of any growing brand.
Right.
But balancing it so if you do get that distribution, like, you have the marketing dollars to support it. Otherwise, it could become really problematic. But I remember when we were first chatting and in the presentation thinking it was really cool how you kind of touch all of it and help a brand think through their sales and think through their marketing and think through operations so it can come together. Like, what was I just love founder stories. So what was the hope when you were setting up your own agency and going off into that world? Like, what uniquely were you trying to bring to the CPG space that maybe didn't exist before or wanted to do a little bit differently?
It started because I was having a blast at Energizer, running my accounts and having much success, but had kids. And so wanted to take a step back. And so then went into sales training and organizational development. From there, went into sales planning and business strategy. From there, into brand marketing. My previous boss took early retirement and was playing golf, and someone from Walmart called him, a divisional manager called him and said, "We have a great product, but the company does not have a clue how to work with Walmart. Would you consider consulting with them?" And so he did that for a few months, and then he called me and said, I think that we can make a business out of helping small brands succeed in big retailers. And I think you can work from home and be more with your kids. And I said, sign me up. So that's when my kids were toddlers, and now they're in graduate school. So there you go. But it's about helping small brands, exactly that, small brands be successful in big retail. I think maybe I have a little affinity for the underdog, and I think that our consumers, more choice is better than not more choice, and more inclusivity is better than less inclusivity. So I want to help do my part, and CPG is what I know.
Taking what is it? It's like I read it in Jay Shetty's book, but if you take what you're good at and then what you have experience doing and it makes you money, it's your purpose is somewhere in the center of all of that. But I probably butchered that description, so I will find whatever the graphic was and share that later, as not to mess it up.
Yeah, a lot of our clients are diverse owned. They're either women owned, minority owned, disabled owned, and some have multiple certifications. So it's really rewarding.
That's awesome. And how do you connect with clients? Is it traditionally referral or events? Like where are you hanging out in the CPG space?
Um, it's a combination of events, I would say, and referrals. We met one of a longtime client just sitting around hanging his head after a meeting and going up to him and saying, "Are you okay?" And him proceeding to tell me about the miserable meeting that he had just had with the retailer. So that began a 10-year relationship with them. And others were blessed to have referrals. So we don't really do any official advertising. And then I met you at the Women's Venture Summit, and I'll just put a shameless plug in for Vizer. When I learned about the program that you have, which is a great way for smaller brands, essentially an alternative to the old coupon method and a way to get the word out about a new brand in a completely new way. It was exciting. So
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I loved your presentation. I think I went back and called some people on my team after, and I was like, you need to look at this piece, you need to look at this piece, you need to look at this piece. They're like all these little nuggets. You had started, I think, with the opening story of, hey, we have this brand. And similar to what you were just describing, that was about struggling in Walmart or something, the 10-year ago one, and coming in and helping them out. How many of the conversations that you get to have with brands, is it like the growth story? Like, hey, we're trying to crack into this door versus, hey, we need support in this retailer to, and I'm sure it's a balance of both, but like, in what ways can you support both instances and what should brands be thinking of for both use cases? I guess we could start with, hey, I'm trying to break in and grow. And then next we could go to, hey, I'm struggling. What do I need to be mindful of?
yeah, we launched a brand into Walmart last year that they had been trying to get into retail for 3 years. They had been DTC and just really couldn't, figure out why they weren't succeeding. We brought to them what we thought the obstacles were, and they agreed with us and they hired us. Now, sometimes we might come to a brand and we might say, well, we think that you need to do X. And they might say, well, we don't want to do that, or we don't have the money to do that. And so, then we just don't work with them because we've seen enough, been around, 20 plus years. And again, 95% of all new products fail. So we want to work with the 5% that we think can succeed. And it's pattern recognition. You can see we can usually tell what's going to work and what's not going to work. And so we lay out what we think needs to be done, and the brand can say yay or nay and go forward. For brands that come to us asking for, hey, we're struggling, we've hit a plateau, or we're declining and we're in danger of being delisted from somewhere, it's much the same. We just take a look at the current situation and diagnose it. Here's what we think that you need to do. Here's the opportunities that we see. Do some market research, enhance your marketing in this way. Think about your consumer in a different way. Think about their buying patterns and why they're shopping there in the first place. And we're totally agnostic to the type of programs that we put into place. We'll use PR if PR is the right thing. We'll use digital if it is. We'll use social. We'll use retailer media networks, but we'll use whatever we think will work to motivate that shopper to make the behavior we want them to take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm interested in the split and the pattern recognition, right? Because it's like 20 years of experience, you build this really powerful toolbox, and an acumen where you can look and say, I just know, like, this is the 95% and this is the 5. What's the quote? It's like you pay the lawyer not for the hour of their time, but for the 20 years that they've been practicing law. When you're looking at that 95/5, what are the things that make a brand in your mind fit the pattern of I see a chance for success that you've been able to develop over, such a long career working in these different capacities?
Such a great question, Sam. First of all, a product that really delivers on what it claims to be and to do. A compelling origin story is very important today. And to meet a white space in the market is also very important if it's something totally new and different. Last year, we introduced an oral probiotic. So people aren't aware that your mouth has its own oral microbiome, just like your gut does. So totally new in the market. Brand owners need to be coachable. And there's a great quote, I think it's Jim Collins, about how a great leader needs to have equal portions of humility and courage. And I think that's really true.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're putting yourself out there when you put your product on the line and putting the origin story forward and like really trying to push it forward. So I am personally a big fan of CPG founders and like rooting for their success. It's man in the arena, like you're in there making it happen. Are there anything on the other side in the 95% where you're like, oh, I see this red flag, I would be concerned taking that brand forward to retail because it has XYZ traits?
Biggest red flag there is around cost structure. If you can't build in the margin necessary to support the marketing, to support supply chain growth, to support growth, if consumers won't pay what they need to pay in order to support the business growth, then it's not going to work. And I think we see a lot of brands that underestimate the investment needed to grow the brand in supply chain and in marketing.
Mm-hmm. So
they'll underprice it, and that's just not sustainable.
Always comes back to the economics at the end of the day. And it almost makes me think of events. Like if you host a large event, it's really a big upfront cost. But you're growing your brand and you're creating connections and it becomes a launch pad for future things. Like retail in a lot of ways, when you're first making that foray, is a big investment and a big outlay. And then over time, it kind of grows to become a revenue center and bring much more value. Do you notice there has to be a lot of like coaching and training with brands around understanding the psychology of retail if it's something new that they're trying to do and level setting those expectations?
100%. I think in general, it seems easy, right? Put a product on the shelf and it just sells. But working with major retailers is extremely complex. And the complexity of it is just not visible to an ordinary shopper. And we work with a lot of really smart people, chemists who invent products and scientists, and they're really smart people, but the complexity behind getting something from a distribution center to a retailer and the data systems behind it and the thought process of it's not about the product, it's about the shoppers, the dollars, and the trips. So it's constant education, and it's really never ending and reminding and reminding and reminding, because I don't think it's intuitive at first. It takes a couple of years until you start to really get it and bake it into your thinking.
Mm-hmm. I like the slogan that we're developing. The shoppers, dollars and trips. Dollars, shoppers and trips. What's the order?
Shoppers, trips, and dollars.
Shoppers, trips, and dollars. That's just kind of a reminder, because the retailer is a business at the end of the day, right? The retailer is a business, and then all of the brands within it, and you have this like ecosystem that's working together to power a lot of the United States food system, and also transact a lot of business amongst different enterprises. So there's a steep learning curve, but I think working with the right people and accessing the right information can help simplify it. And it's always evolving too. Like things that worked in retail 5 years ago probably aren't working exactly the same today, although I think it evolves a little slower than what we see in D2C. A big evolution happening nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's strange. At one sense, it seems very slow, and in another sense, it seems very fast. So it can sneak up on you.
What's your predictions? So it's 2024. We're in Q1. I just had to check the calendar. That's painful. We're in Q1. So what do you think is coming rest of the year, and like what should people be mindful of in the retail landscape?
Basics. You have to focus on the basics. Your messaging. I see messaging increasing in importance. I don't know why. Maybe because there is such a proliferation of availability of products of every sort. So messaging, super important. And then really getting into your shopper's mindset about what motivates them to purchase and what are the financial considerations that they're facing that may be completely unrelated to your product. I was just reading today about how the frequency of trips that shoppers are taking is increasing, but they are buying less per trip. So think about that for your brand. How does that affect your package size, your price, your marketing, your promotion? And then how do you clearly communicate that? And how do you amplify the communications in terms of what sort of digital or offline strategies will you use to connect with the people that are most likely to purchase your product? And then how can you measure the success that you're having so that what are your key performance indicators? So that if you're not meeting those, you can adjust and try something different.
And the quicker you can adjust, the better, because the downstream impacts of that could be huge. Like if the messaging is off, or if the product, what's being communicated is a little bit different than what's received, the pricing, all these things. I think I'm contributing to the stat you mentioned about the shopping. I'm doing the like European thing where you go in and pick up a few items, make dinner, but I do buy single serves much more often now. So I think you're totally onto something there. And I'll be curious if just kind of look like, how did the 4-packs evolve versus the single serves versus all the different options?
Yeah, I could go down a whole tangent, Sam, and ask you why, but that's okay. We don't have time.
We'll save that for after.
Right.
Speaking of time, I ran away with all of my questions and I didn't even open it up for the audience. And we're almost at time, but I want to make sure people know like where to find you and how to connect with you. So if they want to get in touch with you, what is the best way to do so?
Either LinkedIn or on our website, or just email me at angie.echele@retailsmarter.com.
Keeps it smooth and keeps it simple.
That's right.
Well, thank you. I'm going to ask you one last question before you leave. And the question is, if you could be any CPG product, what product would you be?
If you could gather up all a bunch of diverse owned brands and have them collaborate under one roof and ship them in one truck and become the seller of all of these brands and get all of those economies of scale and scope, how great it would be.
Yes, that was it. I thought it was this like beautiful visual of how you could take economies of scale and like all of those benefits and bring them to a subset of brands that could really benefit from it, but had the product and had the
one marketing team, one sales team, one supply chain. It's a beautiful thing.
Hey, maybe we'll make it happen. Well, Angie, thank you so much. This was a great chat and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much, Sam.
And thank you everybody who tuned in. We will talk to you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.